serious. People of Reddit who have practiced or witnessed acts of the witchcraft, voodoo, or the occult. What was the strangest, most unexplainable thing you saw? This happened a few years ago. I was on a dating site and matched with an attractive person. So I started chatting. We made it to the plans tonight part of the conversation, and she told me she was going to play hide and seek with Fluffy, pointing out the item in their second profile picture, a bloody rabbit mask. Okay, let's be weird. So I played along until she mentioned that they would be playing in my basement. I thought, how in the hell? A wild guess probably. I lied and told her I didn't have a basement. Immediately, she texted, "Oh yeah?" And I heard, booming from the basement, "I won't lie to you, Reddit, I about shit myself." Obviously, I blocked her and froze for an hour before I gathered the courage to check my completely enclosed from the outside basement. I didn't find anything, thankfully. I didn't have a smart device at all, and I didn't have any speakers that could have been hacked. I didn't even have wireless internet at the time. The basement was completely empty. I can't explain it in the slightest. I went to a voodoo shop in New Orleans that had a lot of signs up that said no pictures. My boyfriend's mom wanted some voodoo dolls and wanted to see pictures of them before he bought it. I told him not to because I had a bad feeling about it. Immediately after taking the picture, his cell phone lost signal. Mine was totally fine. He couldn't send the picture, so we walked outside and a car drove by and splashed him with water, but I was dry. Freaked us out. I told him to delete the pictures, and we had to buy the 2 dolls he took pictures of. A motherfucking ghost pulled my father from the ankles out of his bed when he was sleeping because he didn't want to go to his aunt's funeral that same week. My mom was with him, of course, and woke up to see how he was just in the middle of the bed with his legs dangling outside, and he was scared, pale from fear. We have had so many paranormal stuff happen to us. Maybe it's because of where we live. Sue, your aunt was pissed he wouldn't go to her funeral. Damn it, John. You are going, even if I have to drag you there by your ankles. And I'm dead, by the way, so trust me when I say people don't want to see that. Now get up. I was about 13 and my grandma was a believer in spirits, witches, etc. Well, I had just pissed her off and she told me I was going to pay. That night I woke up at about 3 in the morning and I saw a little kid with a green shirt on in my room. He stared at me for about a minute and I couldn't look away. He then ran out of my room straight through the door laughing. About 30 minutes later another figure appeared in my room who looked about 15. He just stared at me and mumbled something, and no matter how hard I tried I couldn't talk, scream, or move. I could only look. He then vanished into seemingly thin air. The next night I woke up at about the same time and it sounded as if there were 50 people in my room screaming at me to kill myself, kill my family, and just a lot of negative thoughts in general. The next day I got anointed and it stopped. Later that day I had to see my grandma and I instantly started to get sick after I hugged her, and she just sat there with a smirk on her face. I then got anointed again and it stopped. I still can't explain how she did it, but I still to this day am afraid to make my grandma mad. Not sure if this counts, but when I was in high school I had this sudden bout of nightmares and sleep paralysis. I wasn't going through a stressful time or anything, and I don't freak out easily. I grew up watching of the 80s and 90s horror films, and I normally sleep with total darkness and doors closed. These nightmares were super sudden and happened almost every night. It was constant sleep paralysis where my room was on fire, or there were bats thrashing around above me, or there was a figure hovering over my body and I couldn't breathe. The classic. Sometimes my speakers let out strange frequency-type sounds even when it was switched off. Things would fall off my shelves, etc. My mom would always find me sleeping on the couch the next morning with the TV on because it was so crazy. Suddenly it all stopped, and when I told my mom, she admitted that she had sought advice from a priestess who engraved a blessing for me on a silver pendant and instructed my mom to place it in my room. She didn't want to tell me to see if it would work. I've never had such episodes since. This is a pretty mundane story, but I feel it captures something of what real magic might be like. I used to work in an occult bookstore. We sold mostly psychic nonsense and spiritualist new agey stuff. But there was a bookcase in the back with the real expensive stuff. And the owner was this real old, real wise man. This woman used to come in when I was working, and she'd just talk. for ages and ages. It was a non-stop stream of bullshit. She knew this, she did that, did you know about this, on and on. She'd suck up a ton of time. If you've ever heard the term energy vampire, it would apply here. When she left, you'd just feel drained. One day she comes in while the owner is there. She walks up to the counter and starts her shtick, and he's very polite and listening, but she just sort of runs out of steam. Like within 60 seconds. She hums and haws a bit and then walks out of the store. It would usually take me an hour to get rid of her, and he shut her down in a minute flat, with a smile on his face. I mention it to him, and he says, "There's a circle of protection painted under the floor for a reason." Kid I was friends with in high school was jumped on 2 separate occasions. First, a mutual friend lured him outside his house, where a large group of dudes waited. One of them jumped him and beat him fairly badly. Second was a very high school, meet-me-after-school type fight, which my friend won, and was subsequently jumped by the fight loser's boxer friend. That one he got severely fucked up. So a year or so, he and I have kinda grown apart. He tells me he's getting into Satanism and made a pact to sell his soul. He asked for 3, the one that lured him, the loser of the second fight, and the boxer, to all be killed. Luring guy died in a freak car accident 2-ish years later, thrown from the back of a topless Jeep. Loser of the second fight died 4-ish years later, heroin OD. Boxer died 4-ish years later, don't know. We're in our mid-40s now, he's married with a kid. All probably total coincidence, but at the time it was like. What did you do? I rented a house a few years back and never believed in paranormal or any sort of spirits, etc. My first week in the house was find a few creaks here and there, but nothing major. I very soon started to feel like I was being watched, or just a presence in general. The 3-week I started waking up in the middle of the night with large scratches, almost cuts going the length of my arm. From my wrist to my armpit, 3 scratches all parallel. Always on my right arm. I didn't think much of it. One night I hear a loud bang, go to the back and notice my back door was open. Okay, no worries, I shut and lock the door with a deadbolt. Next morning I wake up and the door wide open, but the freaky part, the deadbolt is still in the locked position as well as the knob. It really starts to freak me out now. I start telling a person I work with about this stuff. He told me his sister was a Native American shaman priestess, whatever it was, and she would come sage bless my house if I wanted. The next week she came over with, I believe it was called sweet grass and sage. She burned the sage walking around and told me can definitely feel a presence in the house. She hung the sweet grass over my bed, and ever since I haven't had anything strange happen. Very strange. My sister is really into occult, Wiccan, witchcraft kind of stuff. I think she meant to be Wiccan, but a 13-year-old isn't incredibly discerning. Around the time she got into it, our house started to get incredibly creepy. We would see things move out of the corner of our eyes. Nobody wanted to be home alone. Nobody wanted to be in the living room at night. At first we could blame it on the house and the land. Then we moved, not just houses but continents. The weird stuff followed. All of it was always centered around my sister and her room, and it was always aggravated when we did serious cleaning, and especially when we moved. The height of it was when we were moving back to the United States. We had 2 different flight groups. My mom and sister left 6 weeks before the rest of us to pick the new house, while my dad, brother and I cleaned and packed at the old house. We heard thumping from my sister's room. The windows and doors would open and close on their own, not possible from just the wind, and shadows would move wildly under the door pretty much every night, even with the blinds closed. I'm not sensitive, discerning of that kind of stuff, but it was plain as day even to me. It was only my sister finally moved out of our next house, and we cleaned out her room, that it all ended. Whatever it was tied to my sister and any sort of disorder, uncleanliness. Okay, don't judge. It was an accidental curse. A friend once told me that she has a very creepy colleague who permanently harassed her. We were on the phone about this, and I said, "May his dick fall off." 4 weeks later, she is calling me again. Guess what happened? His dick fell off. Turns out he was on holidays, brought back with him an infection of unknown origin, and to this day cannot pee by himself and cannot have sex anymore, and the doctors even thought about an amputation. I personally think it was a coincidence, of course, but when my friend called me asking me to guess what happened, I immediately knew what this was about. Evil witches' laughter for 10 minutes straight. These stories remind me of my youth. I once met one guy on the internet who practiced stuff. Before we ever met, I told him to make a summoning circle, like the ones you do when trying to reach a deceased person, but to reach me instead of someone deceased. At that time, I was quite delusional about my body. I considered my chest narrow and fat, but everyone else would say I'm very broad, strong, and muscular. But we only had each other's close-up face selfies. No way to see the body types. So he made the summoning circle and tried to summon me, but it didn't seem to work. Then we both went to sleep. The next morning he said he had a dream about me and told me that he saw me looking very strong and muscular with broad shoulders. But I also had a dream where I saw him. He was very skinny. Then we met in real life to verify that. I was exactly like in his dream. He was exactly like in my dream. He even had the same scent about him. I'm not a religious person, and if anything only believe in doing good and honoring whatever positive energy there is. What happened to me still makes me feel like surely someone was pranking me. I'm not even sure how to share this story, it still freaks me out. I want to as a logical person believe there's no God, or at the very least no such thing as evil spirits, and this has always shaken me enough to question it. I've only ever told this story to my brother. When I was in high school, I dated a guy who, to be frank, was always an asshole, but towards the end of our relationship started worshipping Satan. One night while on the phone, this was before cell phones, he said he sent something to pay me a visit that night. Not taking him seriously at all, I laughed like, yeah, okay, whatever. We hung up the phone, I fell asleep. And in the middle of the night, while asleep, I started feeling the worst stomach cramps I've ever had. Tossing and turning, waking up and trying to go back to sleep. It would not go away unless I opened my eyes and sat up. I settled, trying to sleep, and there was a whisper. It sounded like a man's voice. Hey, it was right in my ear. I opened my eyes, looked around, nothing. Closed my eyes again, drifted off, and again felt cramping to the point of sickness in my stomach as another whisper sounded. Wake up. I sat up. The sick feeling stopped. At this point, I'm fully freaked out. The whispers sounded like someone hovering over me. I pulled the covers over my head and just tried to lay still and pretend I didn't exist, and that shit didn't just happen. Minutes went by and I thought everything was fine, then suddenly tapping started in my room, like someone was walking though and smacking things randomly. I'm not even ashamed to admit that I bolted from my bed and ripped my bedroom door open and ran out. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, I ran into my bedroom to play. But when I went past my bed, I saw a gray man in tattered gray clothes. He was wearing a beat-up trench coat, a white shirt, and some plain gray slacks. He looked absolutely terrified that I had seen him. I ran out of the room to find my parents and never saw the dude again. Not sure how much this counts, but once I had a dream I was in my house and being chased by some figure. I was on the sofa in my dream getting grabbed on the arm by this figure, and then I woke up. Sitting on the sofa, I fell asleep in my bed, with my arm throbbing and red. This is a true story. Me and my dad were hunting in Oregon, and we were very deep in the woods. I do not believe in weird shit, and neither does my dad. As we were trying to find a spot to set up our overnight camp, it was already dark due to the thick canopy. We saw a fire. This was a fairly large fire for the deep wood for a simple camping spot. We weren't sure if it was hunters or somebody with ill intent. We went prone and scoped in on our new friends. There were 6 people standing around this fire, chanting and swaying. Now this is the part of the story that becomes debated, not believed. One of these 6 people transformed into what looked to me and my dad at the same moment a wolf dog. I was so terrified that I got up and ran. My dad, in his infinite wisdom, took a shot at them and decided to follow up on the running thing. We never went hunting again after that. I remember this one time I woke up in the middle of the night to find a lady over me, but that wasn't the weirdest thing. She had a cat head proportionate to a human head, but just wider. She just looked at me in a calming way, and at the time I was on a bunk bed. She slowly just stared into my soul as she crawled back off of my body and down the ladder. I am 100% sure this was real. Even though it's similar to a sleep paralysis, I wasn't scared, I felt safe, and I'm sure I was awake. Maybe it was the ancient Egyptian deity Bastet. She represented protection, fertility, love, and warfare. She was depicted as having the head of a cat. I took up meditation for a short while for 2 reasons. I have really bad anger issues and I'd heard it helped. and because I wanted to try to have an out-of-body experience, I stopped shortly after I had my first OB. When I did it, I was floating above myself looking at my body sitting on my floor. But then I kind of fell into the ground and everything was black for a while. But then I entered a big cavern filled with fire. I flew around there for quite a while. Just searching around, I didn't really see anything interesting. Just rocks and fire. Eventually I felt a strong jerk and was wrenched upwards till I was back in my own body. I quit meditating after that. I was friends with twin girls. They were 7 or 8 years old at the time. For Christmas they get a Ouija board. We had some fun with it, nothing too exciting, asking about boys, teachers, friends, etc. One night I get woken up by sirens. An ambulance is at their house. I found out later that they were playing around with the board, and they received some very serious but very weird injuries. One of them had a 3rd-degree burns on their fingertips and the other had frostbite. I talked to them after and they said they were using the board and started asking questions about devils and angels and whatnot. The little pointer thing started answering. And that's when it burned, froze the finger that were touching the pointer. Freaked me the fuck out, so I never fucked with that shit ever again. Thank you for watching this video to the end. In the comments below the video, write if similar paranormal stories have happened to you. And also be sure to subscribe to our channel to not miss new super interesting videos, and I advise you to watch our other videos.